The alien girl followed the man home. What happened next was breathtaking. Jake had always found solace in the quiet of the woods. Every weekend, he would leave his small home behind and hike through the dense forest that surrounded the area. The tall trees, the crisp air, and the sound of birds calling from afar, it all gave him peace. He loved the feeling of being completely alone, surrounded by nature without a soul in sight. But this time, something was different. It had been a long hike that day, one of the longest he'd done in weeks. He was at the edge of a dense thicket, where the trees grew close together, blocking out most of the sunlight. There was a strange feeling in the air, an unease he couldn't shake. It was as if something was watching him, something beyond the normal rhythm of the forest. At first, he brushed it off. The woods were full of strange noises. The wind, the rustling of leaves, the occasional snap of a twig, nothing unusual. But then, through the trees, he saw her. The girl was standing by a small clearing, her figure illuminated by the faint light that filtered through the canopy above. She was unlike anyone Jake had ever seen. Her skin was pale, almost glowing under the soft sunlight, and her eyes were an unnatural shade of glowing blue, as if they contained the stars themselves. She stood perfectly still, like a statue, her body slender and graceful, her long hair flowing like silk around her shoulders. What struck him most was her wings. They were delicate, feathered, and shimmering with an ethereal light that made her seem more like a vision than a real person. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if he was seeing things, if he had somehow stumbled into a dream or a hallucination. But she was there, standing in front of him, real. The faint breeze made the feathers of her wings flutter, and for a moment the world around him seemed to hold its breath. He didn't know what to do. He stood frozen, his feet glued to the ground as his mind raced. The girl hadn't moved. She was staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes, but there was no hostility in her gaze, only curiosity and perhaps a trace of fear. "Hello," Jake finally managed to say, his voice low and uncertain. The girl didn't respond, but she tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand him. Jake took a cautious step forward, his eyes never leaving her. The forest was eerily quiet, and the only sound was the soft rustling of leaves. The air around them felt charged, like electricity humming in the atmosphere. Another step, then another. He was close enough now that he could see the fine details of her face, the way the light danced off her features, making her look almost otherworldly. She was beautiful in a way that felt unnatural, as though she didn't belong here. "Are you lost?" Jake asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. He wasn't sure why he felt the need to speak to her, but something about her made him want to help. She blinked at him, and Jake could have sworn that for a moment her eyes glowed even brighter. She didn't say anything, but she took a step toward him, slowly, carefully, as if she was unsure of what to do next. Jake's heart began to race. He couldn't explain it, but something told him that she wasn't just a stranger lost in the woods. There was something more to her, something beyond the surface. He didn't know why, but he felt an overwhelming urge to protect her. "Do you need help?" he asked again. I can take you to my house." The girl's gaze softened, and she nodded, though the action seemed almost mechanical, as if she didn't fully understand what she was agreeing to. But there was something in the way she looked at him that made Jake feel that she trusted him, perhaps more than he trusted himself. Without saying another word, Jake turned and began to walk toward the edge of the clearing, towards the path that led back to his house. He wasn't sure why he was doing it. He didn't know this girl, he didn't even know if she was human. But something inside him urged him to keep going, to bring her with him. The girl followed. It wasn't until they were a few hundred yards down the trail that Jake realized the oddness of the situation. The girl had not spoken a single word. She had not even attempted to communicate in any way. Her silence was unsettling, but he didn't press her. He could tell that she was different. She seemed almost ethereal, like she was floating rather than walking, her feet barely touching the earth beneath her. Her wings fluttered softly with every step, but they never seemed to tire her. It was as if they were part of her, inseparable from her being. Jake glanced over his shoulder and saw that she was still there, her blue eyes locked on him, following him with an almost unsettling intensity. He quickened his pace, unsure why, but somehow feeling like he needed to get her to safety. The woods felt oppressive now. He couldn't explain why, but the air around them felt heavier, like it was closing in on them. As they approached the edge of the forest, Jake's mind raced. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why had she followed him? He had no answers, only more questions, and yet for some reason he didn't feel afraid. In fact, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility, as if it was his duty to help her. When they reached his house, Jake opened the door and motioned for the girl to enter. She didn't hesitate. She walked in with a quiet grace, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Jake closed the door behind them and led her into the living room, where the soft light from the lamps illuminated the space. He turned to her, wondering what to do next. She stood by the door, not moving, her eyes scanning the room. For the first time, Jake noticed that her wings seemed to have a strange energy about them, like they were more than just feathers. They shimmered in the dim light, casting soft, almost magical reflections on the walls. It was as if she wasn't just part of this world, she was something else entirely. "I don't know what to do," Jake said softly, almost to himself. He felt foolish for speaking to her like she could understand, but for some reason it felt right. She didn't respond, but she looked at him as if waiting for him to figure it out. Jake took a deep breath and went to the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of water and a sandwich he had made earlier. When he returned, the girl hadn't moved. She was still standing in the same spot, her eyes watching him intently. He handed her the water, unsure if she even needed it, but the girl took it in her hands. She didn't drink, but she seemed to examine it closely, as if she were trying to understand what it was. "You're safe here," Jake said quietly, sitting down across from her. "I don't know who you are or where you come from, but you're not alone anymore." The girl's wings fluttered softly, the light from them casting a soft glow in the dim room. Her gaze shifted from the water to Jake, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something more in her eyes. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. Jake didn't know it then, but that moment would mark the beginning of a journey neither of them could ever have expected. Jake spent the next few days trying to understand the girl. She remained silent, speaking not a word, but her presence was undeniable. Each time he looked at her, he felt something deep inside him shift, a feeling of unease mixed with something more, something deeper. He didn't know who she was or where she had come from, but he couldn't deny the strange pull he felt toward her. He had tried talking to her, offering food and water, asking if she was hungry or tired. She accepted the food without question, though she never seemed to eat much. She drank the water, but always with a quiet, almost meditative calm. Her blue eyes never left him, as if she was studying him, understanding something about him that he couldn't understand about her. Jake had never felt so out of place in his own home. The air in the room seemed to hum whenever she was near. At night, he would lie awake, unable to sleep as he could feel her presence lingering in the shadows, even when he closed his eyes. It wasn't just her physical beauty that unnerved him. It was the feeling that she was something much more than human, something ancient. One evening, as he returned from work, he found her sitting on the porch, staring out at the sunset. Her wings were folded gently behind her, and the light from the setting sun made them glow softly. The sight took Jake's breath away. She looked like an angel. No, she looked like something beyond an angel. The way her form seemed to shimmer, as if she wasn't fully grounded in reality, made his mind race. She had never sat outside before. Always, she stayed inside, watching him silently, absorbing the quiet moments of his daily life. Jake hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to approach her. He didn't want to disturb her, but the urge to speak to her, to connect with her, was overwhelming. He sat beside her on the porch, not too close, but close enough to feel the warmth of her presence. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The sound of the crickets filled the air, a constant buzz that seemed to be the only thing that anchored Jake in reality. After a long pause, Jake finally spoke, his voice low. "You know, I don't know what you're looking for. I don't know if you even know where you are or why you came here, but I want to help. I'll help you find a way home if you want." The girl turned her gaze toward him, her eyes deep pools of blue. She didn't say anything at first, but after a long moment, she gave him the smallest of nods. It was as if she understood him, on some level at least. And for the first time, Jake felt as if he had broken through the invisible barrier between them. But that night, things took a strange turn. The air inside the house grew heavy, thick with a sensation Jake couldn't quite place. It was like the room itself was alive, reacting to the girl's presence. At first, Jake thought it was just his imagination, but then he noticed the way the walls seemed to pulse faintly, as if they were breathing. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows in the corners of the room. He turned toward the girl. She was standing in the middle of the living room, her wings slightly extended, a faint glow surrounding her. Her eyes were closed, but her face was serene, as if she were meditating or listening to something only she could hear. "What's happening?" Jake whispered to himself. It felt as though the world was on the brink of something big, something beyond his understanding. His heart raced in his chest as he watched her. Then, with a soft, barely audible sound, the girl's wings fluttered. At first, it was just a faint sound, like the rustling of leaves. But the moment her wings moved, everything in the room seemed to change. The air around them crackled, a strange energy building between them, growing stronger with each passing second. Jake's breath caught in his throat as the energy enveloped the room. It was as if time itself had slowed. His senses seemed to sharpen, his hearing, his vision, everything. He could hear every heartbeat in his chest, every breath the girl took. The energy was not just in the room, it was inside him, coursing through his body, making him feel alive in a way he had never felt before. Suddenly, the girl opened her eyes. They weren't the same eyes Jake had seen before. There was something different in them now, something more intense, more knowing. Without a word, she extended her hand toward him. Jake stared at it for a moment, unsure of what to do. The energy in the room surged, urging him forward. He took her hand, and the moment their skin touched, something inside him shifted. It was like a floodgate had been opened, and memories, visions rushed into his mind. They weren't his memories, but they were as clear and vivid as if they were. He saw images of distant stars, of planets that spun in ways he couldn't comprehend, of massive ships floating through the black void. He saw people know beings who looked like the girl walking among the stars, their wings glowing with the same soft light. He saw an ancient civilization, one far older than anything on Earth. He saw their destruction, their exile, their scattering across the galaxy. He saw their return, a return that was not just about survival but about awakening. The vision ended as quickly as it had come. Jake blinked, shaking his head. The room seemed to return to normal, the energy dissipating as if it had never been there. The girl stood before him, her hands still outstretched, and Jake was left breathless, his heart pounding in his chest. "What was that?" he gasped, his voice trembling. The girl lowered her hand, her expression unreadable. She said nothing, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She wasn't just here by accident. She had a purpose, and Jake was part of it. For the first time, Jake understood that there was more to this than just finding her way home. She wasn't just a lost traveler. She was here for something greater, something that involved him. The realization hit him hard. Whatever was coming next, he wasn't ready for it, but he would have to be. The next morning, Jake decided to take action. He needed answers, and the girl, despite her silence, was the key. He didn't know what kind of answers he was looking for. He didn't even know where to begin. But the visions, the strange energy, the connection he felt with her, it all pointed to something much bigger than he could have imagined. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He started doing some research, looking into anything that might explain the strange occurrences in his house and the visions he had seen. But nothing he found came close to the truth. No ancient text, no scientific theory, no historical account. Nothing. Jake turned back to the girl. She was sitting by the window, her wings folded behind her, her eyes closed in a quiet trance. For all his research, for all the questions he had, the only answers he needed were within her. He had no idea what to do next. But he knew one thing for sure. His life had already changed in ways he couldn't reverse. And whatever was happening, whatever was going to happen next, he was no longer alone. Jake could feel the weight of the girl's silence in the house. It was a heavy silence, one that carried with it an unspoken understanding. She had become an undeniable part of his life, but the truth was, he didn't know what to make of her. She was unlike anyone or anything he had ever encountered, and though a part of him wanted to push the questions aside and try to live a normal life, another part, one that was growing stronger with each passing day, knew that what was happening to him wasn't just a coincidence. He was no longer just a man who lived in a quiet town on the outskirts of nowhere. Now he was connected to something far larger, something cosmic. And the girl, her presence, her powers, her quiet strength, was at the center of it all. Every day, things seemed to shift ever so slightly. It wasn't just the strange energy that seemed to hum in the air when she was nearby. It was the way the world felt different. The way the birds in the trees outside his window seemed to sing louder when she was near, or how the sky seemed a little clearer when she stepped outside. It was as though the very universe around her bent and shaped itself to fit her presence. Jake tried to keep a sense of normalcy. He would go to work, he would come home, but each time he returned, he would find her waiting for him in the same place, her eyes searching him as if she were waiting for something, waiting for him to figure it out. But he couldn't. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't understand what she wanted, what she needed. She had never spoken a word since the day they met. She hadn't even tried to communicate beyond the faint touches and looks that seemed to tell him everything she needed him to know. It was clear that she didn't speak his language, but somehow he could feel her thoughts in his mind, like they were his own. The strange connection between them seemed to be growing, and Jake was beginning to realize that it was something far more than just a feeling. It was as if his mind and hers were connected in a way that transcended anything he could explain. It had been a week since the strange vision he'd experienced in the house. He hadn't been able to shake it. The images of distant stars, planets in galaxies far beyond Earth, and the ancient civilization that had once thrived across the stars, the girl's people, were still vivid in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, the memories rushed back, overwhelming him. But it wasn't just the visions that haunted him. It was the sense that the girl was somehow awakening something inside him, something he couldn't quite grasp, but that felt more real with each passing moment. That morning, as he sat in the kitchen sipping his coffee, he watched her from across the room. She was sitting by the window again, staring out at the world with that same, distant look in her eyes. Her wings were barely visible behind her, but the faint glow that surrounded her was still there, like a soft halo. For the first time, Jake spoke to her in a way that wasn't a question. "I don't know what you need from me," he said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of frustration and confusion. "I don't know how to help you." She turned her head toward him slowly, her eyes locking with his. It was as if she had been waiting for him to speak those words, and when he did, her gaze softened. For a moment, it almost felt like she understood him in a way that no one ever had before. And then, for the first time since they had met, she did something that surprised him. She moved. She stood up from her spot by the window, her wings fluttering lightly behind her, and took a step toward him. Jake watched, unsure of what to do. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his heart pounded in his chest. It was as if the moment she moved, everything else stopped. The house, the world outside, the very air, they all seemed to hold their breath as she crossed the room toward him. When she reached him, she stopped. Her eyes never left his, and for a long moment they stood there just looking at one another. And then, without warning, she extended her hand toward him. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The last time she had touched him, he had seen those strange visions. Was this another moment like that? He wasn't sure, but something inside him told him to reach out. So he did. When his hand touched hers, the world around him seemed to dissolve. It wasn't like the vision he had seen before. This time there was no rush of distant memories, no cosmic sights, no flood of images. This time it was a feeling, a raw, intense feeling of connection. It was as if the very fabric of the universe was stretched out before him, like he could see everything, everything that was happening and everything that could happen. It was overwhelming. Jake felt his mind expand, as if he were seeing things he had never been able to see before. He saw the stars, the vast emptiness of space, and the swirling galaxies that spun through the infinite void. But there was something else, something closer. The girl's people, her race, had once lived among the stars, traveling from planet to planet, helping to guide civilizations along their path. They had once been gods in the eyes of the beings they had encountered, masters of technology and energy, able to bend the very laws of nature to their will. But something had happened to them. The universe had turned against them. An ancient enemy, one that Jake could not fully comprehend, had forced them into hiding. Her people had scattered across the galaxy, searching for a way to survive. And now here she was on Earth, and Jake had been chosen. The moment passed, and Jake stumbled back, his breath heavy and erratic. He blinked rapidly, trying to shake the feeling of being overwhelmed. But when he looked at her again, the girl's eyes were different. There was a new understanding in them, a new awareness. She had shared something with him, something important, and he knew that his life was no longer his own. He was a part of something much larger than himself, something far beyond the small life he had once known. She stepped back slowly, and Jake found himself following her movements with wide, disbelieving eyes. There was no doubt in his mind now. The girl wasn't just a lost soul from another world. She was the key to something that had been hidden for millennia. And somehow Jake was connected to it all. That afternoon, the quiet in the house was different. The air didn't hum with the same strange energy it had before, but Jake could still feel it deep within himself. The world had shifted again, and he was no longer just a man with questions. He was now a part of something. He needed answers, but more than that, he needed to understand why the girl had come to him. Why had she chosen him? What role did he have to play in whatever was happening? That evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned dark, Jake sat down at his kitchen table. The girl was across the room, watching him with those glowing blue eyes, waiting. He could feel the weight of the silence, the gravity of the moment. Everything was about to change. The strange connection between him and the girl was only the beginning. The truth was out there, and Jake knew he had to find it. The problem was he didn't know where to start. Jake could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him every day. The girl, this strange, alien being, had become more than just a mystery. She had become a puzzle he couldn't solve. Her presence was both soothing and unsettling. Her silence was no longer just a strange quirk. It was a constant reminder of how much he didn't understand. For days, nothing seemed to change. The world outside his home continued on, the mundane rhythm of life continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, with the girl now living under his roof, everything felt different. The house, once his place of peace, now felt like a cage. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, seemed to carry with it the weight of an unspoken tension. The girl sat by the window most of the time, her gaze distant, as though she were watching something only she could see. Her wings shimmered softly in the dim light, their delicate feathers a constant reminder of how much she was unlike anyone Jake had ever known. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, but that beauty was also a mystery. Every time he looked at her, it felt like there was something about her, something important, that he wasn't seeing, something that was just beyond his reach. Jake had tried to talk to her, tried to break through the silence that stretched between them. But no matter how hard he tried, she never spoke. She would listen, and sometimes she would look at him with that soft, understanding gaze, but she never said a word. It was as though she was waiting for something, waiting for him to understand something, but she wouldn't help him get there. One evening, after another long, silent day, Jake decided to take matters into his own hands. He couldn't just wait forever. He needed answers. He needed to know why she was here, what her purpose was, and why she had come to him. He couldn't keep living in this strange limbo, uncertain of everything. He found himself in the living room, staring at the girl as she sat in her usual spot by the window. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy, like something important was about to happen. Jake stood for a moment, watching her, trying to gather his thoughts. He had no idea what he was going to say, but he knew he had to say something. He stepped forward slowly, his feet hesitant. The girl's eyes followed him, but she didn't move. She never moved unless she needed to. Her wings fluttered slightly, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough to make Jake pause. He had seen the way her wings shimmered before, and he had a strange feeling that they weren't just wings. They were a part of her, part of something far greater than he could understand. He sat down in front of her, his eyes meeting hers. "I don't know what you're waiting for," he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with frustration. "But I can't keep pretending that nothing is happening. This isn't just some coincidence. I know it. You're not just some stranger who wandered into the woods. You're something else, and I need to know what that something is." The girl didn't respond. She simply stared at him, her blue eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't name. There was sadness there, a kind of deep sorrow that seemed to echo in the air around them. Jake felt it too, deep in his chest, as if he were connected to her in a way he couldn't explain. For a moment, Jake was about to speak again when something strange happened. The air around them seemed to thrum, a low hum that vibrated through the walls and the floor. It wasn't the same as the strange energy he had felt before, but it was close. This time, it wasn't just the house that was reacting, it was everything. The very air seemed to be charged, alive with some unseen force. The girl stood suddenly, her movements graceful and fluid. She didn't look at Jake. Instead, she walked toward the center of the room. Her wings unfolded, and for a moment, Jake could see the full extent of their beauty. They were vast, delicate, and glowed with an inner light. The feathers shimmered, casting soft beams of light across the room, illuminating the walls and floor in a pattern that seemed almost purposeful. Jake watched, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt something deep within him stir, a feeling of recognition, of belonging. It was as though the girl's wings weren't just beautiful, they were a message, a sign that something big was about to happen. The girl raised her arms, her wings stretching outward, and the room seemed to grow brighter, as if the light from her wings was spilling into the very walls of the house. The temperature dropped, the air thickening, and Jake's skin tingled with the sensation of electricity. He took a step back, unsure of what was happening, but unable to pull his eyes away from her. Then, without warning, a voice, soft, ethereal, echoed in his mind. It wasn't her voice, not in the way he expected. It was as if the words came from everywhere at once, a message that didn't need to be spoken aloud. "You have been chosen," the voice said. "You are the key to everything." Jake's breath caught in his throat. His hands shook slightly, and he reached out instinctively, as if to steady himself. The girl's wings folded back as she turned toward him, her eyes fixed on him, piercing through him like she could see everything about him. "You've always been part of this," the voice continued, though it wasn't coming from her mouth. "You just didn't know it, but now you do." Jake felt the weight of the words settle over him, heavy and undeniable. He had always felt like something was missing, like there was a reason he had never felt completely at home in the world. Now, it seemed like he was being told that he was meant for something, something important, something that had to do with her. "What do you mean?" he whispered, his voice shaking with disbelief. "What am I supposed to do? I don't understand." The room grew brighter still, and the girl moved toward him. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment everything else seemed to fade away. It was just her and him in the room, connected by something unseen but undeniable. She took his hand gently, her touch sending a shock of warmth through him, and for a moment he could feel her heart, her emotions, her thoughts. "You are the bridge," the voice said again, clearer this time. "The link between the stars and the earth. You will help us rise again." Before Jake could say anything, the girl released his hand and stepped back. The brightness in the room began to fade, the energy dissipating as if it had never been there. The girl's wings folded once more, and she lowered her arms, her eyes softening. Jake stood in stunned silence. He didn't know what to make of what had just happened. The girl, this alien, had communicated with him, and in doing so, she had revealed something that shook him to his core. He was part of something larger than himself, something he didn't yet understand, but something he was now tied to. The girl turned away, walking toward the window once more. Jake stood frozen, trying to process the enormity of what he had just learned. The bridge, the link, what did it all mean? Why had she come to him? Why was he chosen? The answers were out there somewhere. And he knew that the only way to find them was to trust in the girl, to trust in what had just happened, and to step forward into a world that was no longer the one he had known. As the room settled back into its quiet, familiar state, Jake took a deep breath. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. The girl was no accident. She had come into his life for a reason. And he was ready to discover what that reason was. Jake didn't know how long he had been standing there, staring at the spot where the girl had been moments before. His mind was racing, filled with questions and confusion. But there was one thing that stood out more than anything else, the weight of her words. "You are the bridge." What did it all mean? He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a scholar of the stars. He was just a man, an ordinary man living a quiet life. But the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. His life had never been ordinary. Something had always felt off, like he was meant for something bigger, something he didn't understand. But now, with the girl, her powers, her wings, the visions she had shown him, it all started to make sense in a way. The girl wasn't just a stranger who had wandered into his life. She had chosen him for a reason. He was part of something ancient, something far bigger than the small life he had led before she had arrived. As the days passed, Jake grew more and more attuned to the strange presence in the house. The girl's silence was no longer unnerving. It was comforting. She wasn't just silent, she was waiting, waiting for him to understand, waiting for him to take the next step. The energy in the house was different now. It wasn't the chaotic, overwhelming force it had been the first time. It was quieter, more controlled, as though the girl was learning how to control it. But Jake could still feel it, thrumming just beneath the surface. Every time she was near, the air seemed to hum with energy, like a string pulled taut, ready to snap. Jake knew that the time had come. Whatever had been waiting for him, the reason the girl had come into his life, was now pressing against him, urging him to act. It was the morning of the 5th day after the vision. He awoke to the familiar quiet of the house. The girl was sitting by the window, as always, staring out at the world as though she were seeing something Jake couldn't. He watched her for a long moment, trying to find the words he needed. "Why me?" he asked, the question burning in his chest. "Why did you choose me?" "What do you want from me?" The girl didn't turn to face him, but Jake didn't expect her to. Her silence was something he had come to understand. This was how she communicated. And for the first time, Jake realized he had stopped expecting words from her. He had learned to listen to what was unsaid. The room was quiet for a long time. Jake felt like the girl's presence was filling every corner, every crevice of the house, and yet, despite the closeness, she seemed far away, like she existed in a place just beyond his reach. Then slowly she stood up. Her wings, glowing faintly, shifted behind her as she turned toward Jake. For a moment they simply looked at each other, two beings from different worlds connected by something neither of them fully understood. Without a word, the girl stepped forward. Jake's heart began to race as she approached him. He felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing him to her, but he didn't resist. His eyes never left hers. He couldn't look away even if he wanted to. When she reached him, she extended her hand, and once again Jake felt that strange spark between them, the same energy that had coursed through him during the vision. But this time it was different. It was more real, more immediate. He felt the force of it in his bones, in his blood. He felt it everywhere. It was like the very air around him was alive with her power. She touched his hand gently, and once again Jake felt the flood of emotions, of visions filling his mind. But this time it was different. The images weren't just distant memories of a lost civilization. They weren't just abstract glimpses of alien worlds. They were his memories, flashes of a past life, a life he had never known he had. He saw himself not as the man he was now, but as a leader, a guide, someone who had once walked among the stars, helping to shape the course of history. He saw images of the girl's people, beings of light, of energy, of power, traveling across the cosmos, spreading knowledge and guiding civilizations. He saw battles, wars fought not with weapons, but with knowledge, with the force of their minds and spirits. And in the midst of it all, he saw the girl's people scattered, their civilization shattered by an ancient enemy. Their power was too much for the enemy to ignore, and so they had been hunted, forced to hide, to flee to distant corners of the galaxy. And now Jake understood. He wasn't just a man caught in the middle of a strange encounter. He wasn't just some bystander in this grand cosmic drama. He was connected to all of it. His mind was racing as the flood of memories subsided. The girl's people had been exiled. They had hidden for centuries, waiting for the right time to return. But they couldn't do it alone. They needed him. He was the bridge, the key to unlocking their return. "You are the one who will awaken us," the girl's voice echoed in his mind again, not spoken aloud, but felt as though her words were carved into his very soul. "You are the one who will bring us back." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a leader. He was just a man who had been going about his life, trying to get by. And yet here he was, standing at the precipice of something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. "What do I have to do?" he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. The weight of his words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with the knowledge that everything was about to change. The girl didn't respond with words, but her eyes glowed brighter. And in that moment, Jake understood. He didn't need the answers. He didn't need to have everything figured out. He just needed to trust in what had brought him here. Her people had once been gods. They had once shaped the course of the galaxy, bending the very fabric of reality to their will. But they had fallen. Now they needed Jake to help them rise again. The girl stepped back, her wings unfurling behind her in a display of light and power. She seemed to grow taller, her presence filling the room with an overwhelming sense of strength. And in that moment, Jake realized that this wasn't just about the girl. This was about all of them, her people, his people, the entire universe. She turned toward the door, her wings shifting with a grace that made the room feel like it was alive. She had shown him the path, but now it was up to him to take the first step. Without a word, she stepped outside into the soft light of the dawn. Jake followed, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind still reeling from everything he had just experienced. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. His life was no longer his own. He was part of something far bigger than he could ever have imagined. He stood at the threshold of a new world, a new reality, and he knew that he had to be ready. The time had come. The stars were calling. The girl was waiting. and together they would awaken the power that had been hidden for so long.